was Depression time, post-Depression, and we were pretty poor back in Minneapolis. I ran away from home because I was failing in school, hated school, high school, but failed every grade except art. And I was pretty good at that, so I ran away to work for Walt Disney and took the freights out to California and submitted my drawings, my meager little drawings, to the Disney studio, which was then over in Silver Lake. And I wasn't good enough, so they sent me to art school, which I went to for 3 months, I think, and came back with new drawings, and they hired me. Persistence, knocking on the door. They just wanted to get rid of me, I think. Anyway, that's what led me here. I wanted to be an animator. I wanted to work for Walt Disney. And one thing led to another. The war came along, and I went in the Air Force and flew 35 missions with a B-17, and then went into P-51s as a fighter pilot, which I'd always wanted. And after that, came back, leading up to how did I get into writing, I suppose. Again, I was striving to make a living doing something, and I fell in love with an actress who wanted her own radio show. There was no television in those days. This is 1945. And I wrote a radio show for her, which she submitted to CBS. And I was called in by the head of CBS in those days, was Ernie Martin, who later became very successful on Broadway, Fuhrer and Martin, which produced Guys and Dolls and many hit shows, Silk Stockings, How to Succeed in Business. He was running radio, and he hired me to write radio shows. That's how I broke in.
Now, that's perfect. Now, this just off the cuff from me, was My Favorite Husband on at that point with Lucille Ball?
Sure, Jimmy Durante. I became a gag writer, actually. Worked for all the comedians, Red Skelton and Jimmy Durante, Opie Cates, who not many people remember, Red Skelton, Crosby, a lot of the old timers. Danny Thomas wrote his radio show.
Kay Kaiser?
No.
Kay was...
no, that wasn't a comedy show.
No, he just had his regular big band show.
Yes,
That's
the
right.
big band show, huh? Then television broke back in New York.
Okay, let's start there.
All right.
Since we're going to go that route, let's go there. So why don't we start with, then television.
Oh, but wait, let's just before we leave radio, because something ties into that. I found a young man who, a friend of mine, we had a baseball team out in the valley, all the actors from radio and the writers. And this was a starving young man who wanted to be a writer. His name was Jim Fritzell. And I had a job, just got a new job, writing Our Miss Brooks, the radio show. And I took him along, and he turned out to be my longtime partner, Jim Fritzell. And at that time, Sweeney and March, who were radio actors, marvelous team, good friends, had gone to New York to do a gig back there. And they called, and they said, "Get your butt back here. There's a new thing breaking here called television. It's going to sweep the nation. You've got to come back and become a part of it." Well, we didn't want to give up the check from Our Miss Brooks, so I told Jim to finish the script, and I flew into New York. I said, "I'll see what it's like if they're really true." I never came back because it was exploding in New York. At that time, I wrote for a lot of comedy shows back there, and then I wrote a drama. I hadn't written a drama till then. Philco Playhouse bought it, and suddenly I switched horses and became a dramatic writer. And in the course of writing for Philco with Fred Coe producing and Delbert Mann directing, I wrote a comedy show, the first that had ever gone on the air for Philco. And it was called The Copper, and it was about a meek little fellow who didn't want to be a policeman, but his father and his grandfather had been policemen, so he became a policeman. We couldn't cast it until finally the casting director took Fred Coe and me down to the Village Vanguard, a nightclub in the Village in New York. And there was a little man named Wally Cox doing an act down there. And he was just perfect for it. So we hired him for one show. He'd never acted before. Did a marvelous job on our Philco. And the next morning, letters poured in and phone calls. And Pat Weaver, who ran NBC in those days, said, "Write a show for this man. He's hot." So I wrote a show called Mr. Peepers for him. And I needed another writer and brought Jim Fritzell in from the coast, and we got together again. So much for that. Anyway, I had to mention how this happened with Jim Fritzell because it features later. Let's talk about Mr. Peepers. We'll go back to Mr. Peepers. Television's infancy. This was the first situation comedy, big time, 8 o'clock Sunday night comedy. Very mild show, slow-paced, would never work today. Jim Fritzell and I are sitting in a room at Talent Associates, which was an agency owned by David Susskind and Al Levy. In the next office, this is the strange part, renting space from Talent Associates are two people named Ernie Martin and Cy Feuer. They're now Broadway producers. Ernie had left CBS to produce a show on Broadway, which was a big hit, and had taken space in this Talent Associates. So I'd see Ernie, the man who gave me my start, every day. He gave me my first job in radio, and here he was in New York, as I was. In the interim, well, let's stay with this part. Jim and I are sitting in the office one day writing Mr. Peepers, and a knock on the door, and here's this little gnome of a man who came in and introduced himself as Everett Greenbaum. And he said, I was looking for a job. I said, doing what? He said, writing. I said, no, we write this show. We don't need you. And he said, but I need the job. It's Christmas time, and I was working at Macy's, and I got fired today. It's snowing outside. It was rather cold, and we felt sort of sorry. He said, what did they fire you for? And he said, well, my job was selling these little frogs that you put in your lapel. It has a tube on it that goes to a bulb in your pocket, and when you squeeze the bulb, the frog goes, bee-oop, bee-oop. And I was selling them and standing there talking with one of the pretty sales girls when the floor manager came by, and he said, Greenbaum, up your sales. And I turned to him, and I said, up yours, sir, and he fired me. And it was all very sad. We said, well, we'd love to hire you, but we don't need a writer, and we don't have the money for it. He said, well, would you just play this record that I made? And we took a record. It was a 45-degree RPM. We put it on. We played it. Now, Everett is sort of an actor. He always loved to act. In his latter days, he became an actor. He had a little radio show up in Buffalo, New York. And on this record, he was playing a part of an English detective with his bad English. He came on and he said, it was a foggy day as I stepped out of my office to start this big case. And as I rounded the bend, he said, I heard it. And it made me stop and think. There it was. And you hear Big Ben striking. But he goes for the whole strike at midnight. Have you ever heard Big Ben strike? It goes on for a minute, each strike. He had the audacity to play all 12 of those straight without any dialogue. And we started to listen. We said, he can't do this. That's airtime. We started to giggle. Then we started to laugh, and pretty soon tears are rolling down our face because it's so audacious to think of anybody doing this. And we finally said, you're hired, and gave Everett his first job in television. And he was just a delight. He and Jim struck it off perfectly.
That's so funny because it would work beautifully in his interview. To intercut a piece from you talking about him would be wonderful.
It was a marvelous experience knowing Everett, charming.
Let's talk about your time in the war and how it led you, where it led you.
Well, it was just a sequence in a life. Went in at 1942.
You were in Europe?
I was out here working. I was in the animation business when war began. And I signed up for the Air Force and became a pilot. Flew 35 missions as the pilot of a B-17 in the Eastern Theater in Europe. And I'd always wanted to fly fighters. So when you finish 35 missions, you can take a leave of absence or you can request whatever you want. So I asked to fly fighters, and they assigned me to P-51 Squadron. War was pretty well over at that time, but I did get in a lot of hours. And no hero, no ace, just lucky to have survived without any accidents. Last landing was wheels up. I had my hydraulic system shot out over Germany and had to come in belly in, and that sort of finished me. I said, I don't want to fly anymore.
Got that out of my system.
Yes.
I'm trying not to say anything. I'm laughing because I'm picturing that. I mean, you downplay it so much. No hero, no. But
Well,
you know,
it wasn't. I mean, there were good pilots, killers. That's what they needed, and there were a lot of those. I wasn't one of them.
is there anything regarding radio or early television we haven't talked
Early
about?
television,
That
I met and married an actress named Maggie McNamara, who was.
Let's go into your personal. Are you rolling? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So let's start again.
Start again.
Personal, pursuant to personal life. During this period in New York, I met and married an actress named Maggie McNamara, who was acting in a play called The Moon is Blue, which was considered outlandish in its time because she was called a professional virgin. They wouldn't give it a seal of approval. Can you imagine? There wasn't one four-letter word in it. Nobody undressed. Wouldn't give it a seal. The Hayes office. Anyway, she was an actress, and she made several pictures. She made The Moon is Blue with David Niven and Bill Holden, and Three Coins in a Fountain. And I was known as Mr. McNamara during those years. My writing career sort of languished because I was busy taking care of the household. Anyway, for a few years, for 4 or 5 years, the writing languished. And then we got divorced and back to writing. Laid a big bomb in television, huge bomb after Mr. Peepers. Eastman Kodak's first transition from radio to television. And being the fair-haired boy in television in those days, they gave me 39 pay play, an unbelievable contract, 39 shows, without a pilot, with just a script. Can you imagine that? My marriage was breaking up, contributes to this, but the show was a failure. I wasn't feeling very funny, and living in a room with a hanging light bulb, I wrote like that. And the show was dismal. It was David Wayne and nobody of importance in it.
David Wayne from Adam's Rib, who played the neighbor.
Well, that was later. He was actually a Broadway actor, Mr. Roberts, and he was Sakini in the Tea House of the August Moon. I couldn't locate David's character all the time during the series. He was fine as Sakini, that was a character, and then Mr. Roberts, he had a character, but I couldn't locate a character for David Wayne. It's my fault, not his. I can't blame him. At any rate, that was a miserable failure. I'm sure Eastman Kodak dreads the memory of that. They pumped a lot of money into this. At any rate.
But they must have thought well of your script and wanted to
They did.
sponsor a show with no pilot.
They did. I did it badly. I was everything. Producer, writer, director. I hired marvelous George Kirgo. His first job was hired in those days to work with Harvey Orkin, who was one of the great agents of all time. Funniest man I've ever known, Harvey Orkin. Everybody in the Writers Guild knows Harvey Orkin.
George was a writer?
George started to be a writer with Harvey Orkin. That was one team. David Rayfield was one of the writers who now does all the rewrites for Sidney Pollack, another member of our guild, and Jimmy Lee, who at that time was an actor and became a hit playwright with a show at the Circle in the Square called Career, which was later filmed as a movie. I had 4 fascinating people, but between the 5 of us, we couldn't turn out any good scripts. I think they'll all agree that it was a lot of fun, but it wasn't very creative.
Now, how about if we move on to...
Well, I want to know just sequentially what happened after that.
After that, I couldn't get a job.
Yeah, how do
And
you
I
establish
couldn't get a
yourself?
job in New York. One failure like that, and I was dead. I couldn't do a commercial. So I'd met this lovely lady to whom I'd been married for 44 years now, Micheline, who was a top Vogue model in those days and making a lot of money. And we fell in love, and she gave up her career and moved west with me. We got married and came out here. They hadn't received the words that I was a bum out here, so I was a hero here. It's amazing. Between East and West Coast, there wasn't much contact. Out here, they said, "Oh, Mr. Peepers, oh, come and do anything you want here." So they hired me to do 2 Playhouse 90s. I couldn't get a job in New York, but out here, the memory of Philco Playhouse and Mr. Peepers was still memorable to them here. So I broke in by doing 2 Playhouse 90s here, writing and directing them.
Now, how did you go from, how was it that you always were able to write and direct? Because usually you know how that
It happened, my first direction happened in New York during that bad period. I did get one job, a very important job. I'd always admired a certain work called, Stefan Zweig wrote, called, I should remember the name of it. Can't remember. Anyway, I bought the rights to it, and the Ford Theater wanted to do it on a show called Omnibus. Do you remember Omnibus? Very prestigious show, 90 minutes. They hired me thinking that I was the director of Mr. Peepers. They let me direct. I'd never directed in my life. Didn't know how to direct. It was, I can't say whether it was a good show, but it got great reviews with Joe Anthony. That was my first directorial job, and I didn't know anything about it. Made a horrible mess of the opening because I didn't know the key words when we got on camera, how to switch cameras. And I was going to walk into the office and say, get somebody else because I don't know. When an hour had passed, I'd set the first shot, and I didn't know how to go to the second shot. And finally, the assistant director was looking at his watch. He said, well, we're about an hour overdue. And he said, can we go to the next shot? And I said, yeah, let's do that. And he said, take 2. Well, that was the key. I didn't know that. All the time I'd been in television watching Delbert Mann and all the guys direct, I never listened to what was going on. Take 2 was the key, and the TD switched to take 2, another camera. Suddenly it dawned on me I had 5 cameras. All I had to do was call on either one. Take 3, take 4. So I got through the show without throwing up. And that was
just a matter of the jargon.
Basically, it was.
Take one, take two, take
I knew where to put the camera. I knew what the actors should do. But I didn't know the technical end of it.
That is a great story. I mean, I can understand how that would happen, though. Really.
I should have known better. I mean, all the things I'd done for Philco and Studio One and all, I never
As you
paid.
said, though, you're not paying attention because it's not you in the chair.
That's right.
Doing that
I'm sitting in the booth
portion.
worrying about how the actors
You're
are saying my
focusing on it.
line.
Exactly. So I could completely see how that could happen.
Now, there's a question that somebody always asks me is, what's your worst moment in television? Would you like to know? We're doing a show I wrote called Operation Airlift for Delbert Mann is directing. And it's about the Berlin airlift. And he's pulling Telesini up time after time with footage of planes flying in and out of Berlin, bringing coal, bringing food, doing all that. And Saturday, our first day on camera, Ira Wallach quits. He was the lead. And he quits. He walks out because they had a money dispute with Fred Coe. And about an hour later, Fred and Delbert Mann, the director, called me into a room and they said, guess what? We're stuck. We go in the air tomorrow. You've got to do it. I said, do what? They said, you've got to play the role. I said, I'm not an actor. They said, but you know the dialogue. I said, well, I'm not going to do it. I refused. I'm not going to make an ass of myself. In an hour, they bought me a couple of drinks and they talked me into going on camera. National television, live. The next day, I stayed up all night learning, brushing up on the lines and smoking, learning when to puff and when it's not. I thought that was acting. Inhale, exhale, talk, inhale again, talk. Great acting background. Anyway, we go on camera the next day, and they have to mark on the floor for me with chalk 1, with an arrow 2, move here, move there. They had to mark everything out, say this over here. Delbert Mann, who was the calmest, sweetest man in the world, Mr. Calm, only time I've ever heard him explode with 4-letter expletives on the speaker. Screaming expletives at me, cursing me, because he's running out of time. We're going to go on the air at 8 o'clock that night. And finally we got through it. But that was the worst time I've ever had in television, trying to be an actor. It's a craft unto itself. You can't just suddenly step out there and act.
And yet later in the biography is some roles that you played.
No, they were just walk-ons.
No,
they were
nice.
Hitchcock
They're
roles.
roles.
No.
Okay, and after that
California.
sequence?
California, I'm doing every show now, every show imaginable, every series imaginable. I start the rifleman, teaching Chuck Connors how to cock the gun and shoot it, and the rifle. Every imaginable show. There was a lot of work out here in those days. Television had switched from live to film, and that's why we came out here. And four-star theater was going. Everything was booming. Wagon Train, my gosh, I did a lot of Wagon Trains. Wrote and directed those. For Red Christie, the producer, nice man, football player. I'm directing a show for Screen Gems with Cliff Robertson. It was a half-hour Alcoa Goodyear, I think it was. Trying to remember. Cliff Robertson played the pool hustler, much like Paul Newman did in The Hustler. But it was in a half hour, and he needed money, and so forth and so forth. I'm working away, shooting it, and the assistant director comes up and says, there's a phone call for you. And I said, who is it? And he said, it's a Mr. Disney. I said, sure it is, yeah. Tell him, well, get lost. And he comes back when I'm working, and he says, no, it really is Mr. Disney. And I said, you don't understand. People call up, they say anything to get me on the phone. They want jobs. They're actors. Give me the phone. I said, yeah, what do you want? And this voice says, why are you talking to me that way, Bud? And it was Walt Disney, who had known me as Bud from all the years before. I'd worked there for 6-7 years as a child instead of finishing school. And I said, is this Walt? He said, well, who'd you think it was? Damn it. He said, now get your butt over here. I've got something you may want to do. I said, well, I'll finish up tomorrow. I'll be in the following day, Walt. He said, okay. Calls me out there, and he has a film for me. Now, in those days, nobody would hire a TV director to do a feature film. It just wasn't done because all the big hitters were out there. The Otto Premingers and the Milestones and the good directors. Anyway, Walt gives me a script, and it's just dreadful. And here's a chance to step into feature films, and I have to turn it down. I said no to him. I didn't like it, and I think he was impressed by the fact I turned it down, because a week later he called me back and said, read this one, you may like this. And it was a script. It was a book called Pollyanna. Read it, loved it, and said yes, and Walt and I embarked on a marvelous adventure for 2 films. They were just very happy experiences. Loving actors, dedicated to acting, no pressure from above. Once the script was done and cast, Walt let everybody alone, and you went your way and made the film. Just absolutely perfect conditions to create with. Pollyanna was the first feature. I cast a lot of the Mr. Peepers actors and actresses in it, brought them out from New York. It was fantastic, coming from television with 3-wall sets, to be able to say, I want a 1928 locomotive. And they said, when do you want it? You know, what hour of the day would you like to have it? It was just unbelievable to step into this world of feature films. It was a congenial, marvelous cast. Carl Malden. When I cast him, he calls a week later, once the contract had been signed, and he says, could I see you? I have to have a request to make. Well, when that happens in television with a star, it means they want a red carpet, they want a bigger cabin, they want first-class treatment. I said, yes, Carl, what do you want? And he said, well, I know it's asking a lot, but I'd like a room and a tape recorder. And I said, and he said, that's it. I said, that's all you want? He said, yes, I'd like to come in and rehearse. I said, well, you're not being paid for this. And he said, I know that. He came in 2 weeks ahead of shooting start and rehearsed in a room I got him with a tape recorder. That's an actor. That's the old group theater at work. Training and diligence and competence. Everybody was like that. Jane Wyman, even Adolphe Menjou, the pinch fist, was darling to work with. Haley, of course, was everyone's delight. She just enhanced and entranced everyone. They wanted to work with her because she was so much fun. She was so bubbly and vivacious, And she reached across and she listened. She upstaged them like Marlon Brando taught this class. You can upstage by listening hard. And she did that just naturally. She would walk away with scenes by she was listening and twisting her face and doing contortions. Anyway, it was a marvelous cast. Agnes Moorehead was a delight. I thought all films were going to be like that, which they weren't, as I found out later with Glenn Ford. But anyway, those two films, after that, Walt said, here's another one I want to make when you finish editing, Pollyanna. And he handed me a slim volume by a German writer named Kastner, a short story called the Twins, the double, actually, the German double twins. I read it, loved it, and sat down and wrote this screenplay for the Parent Trap. Haley, again, has now grown a year when we start shooting. Wait a minute, I have to tell you how we got Haley. Wouldn't you be interested in finding that out?
Sure.
We couldn't cast Pollyanna. I saw 1,000 little kids out here, and none of them were good enough actors. Walt had to go to London for an opening of some film, and he took Bill Anderson with him, who was running the studio, and the two wives, Lily Disney and Bill's wife, I forget her name, and they're in London, and the guy said, get lost to the wives. We have business to do. So the wives go to see a movie. They walk through the park, and then they go to see a movie called Tiger Bay, which was Haley's first movie, with a marvelous German actor. I think it was Horst Buchholz, I believe, wasn't it? And they saw this girl, and they just came running back to the hotel, and they said, oh, my God, we found Pollyanna. And Walt, in effect, said, mind your own business to Lily and to the other wife. He says, we're looking as hard as we can. She says, but you've got to see this movie. They dragged their husbands over. They saw the movie. Walt was impressed. He sent me a print from London, airmailed it out. I saw it, fell in love with her. That's how the wives found Haley Mills for us.
And she got a special Oscar that year for Best Juvenile Performance, didn't she?
She got a special one, I'm going to go back, digress a bit. I'm going to go back to Disney's, back to Pollyanna and the Parent Trap. We storyboarded everything over there. I guess you know that storyboards are part of the storytelling technique of animation, and it carried over with me into filmmaking, as it did with a lot of people. The head sketch artist was a man named Dale Hennessy, whose father was a layout man there, Hugh Hennessy. Dale was a young man with a tremendous talent. He could draw on a 4x6 pad an actual camera setup of what I wanted. Not many sketch artists can do that. They can illustrate what you want, but you could actually take his frame and put it in your camera. A rare talent and a fine artist. When I moved, I'll tell you about that, when I broke away from Disney and went to Columbia to do Under the Yum Yum Tree, I called Dale and said, how would you like to be an art director? He's a lowly sketch artist, and he jumped at the chance, came over. He did 2 pictures for me, 2 Jack Lemmon films, Under the Yum Yum Tree and Good Neighbor Sam. And then he went to 20th Century Fox. On his 3rd film, he won the Academy Award, Fantastic Voyage. He did the art direction on that and won the Academy Award. As a young man, it's so exciting to see success like that happen in this town. Very rare. Just an isolated incident.
That's a great story. No, that's a great story.
I want to hear the story of each of those movies. Good Neighbor Sam,
Yeah,
How to
Under the Yum
Succeed
Yum
in
Tree.
Business, Under the Yum
Okay.
Yum Tree. In turn, starting with.
After that,
Can we talk a little bit about the cast of Parent Trap, or do you want to go down that path?
Sure.
Sure.
Do you want to
While
talk
we're
a
on
bit
that.
more about?
my dream cast in the Parent.
Tell me more about the shooting of the Parent Trap.
Well, everybody, again, was too congenial. It was ensemble working, which is the perfect condition. No temperaments, no strange requests for special favors. It was just pure ensemble acting and working together. And Walt was adorable. The only time we saw Walt was after he ran dailies. He'd come down after lunch and he'd stop and he said, it's marvelous, you're the best, you're the finest, you're the greatest, go on, continue. That's all he ever said. Walt's only fault was he didn't want to cut film. He fell in love with film. Pollyanna was 20 minutes too long. Parent Trap was at least 12 minutes too long. He wouldn't let me cut anything. He just loved film. The lights would come up in the sweatbox, and he'd be crying at his own film. Day after day, he'd weep, and you'd have to pass him Kleenex. He was a very big sentimental crier.
Did you envision the cast? Did you have anything to do with the casting in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I picked it, and then I had to get it okayed by Walt, but he okayed everything.
Okay, let's start with a full sentence there, so that.
Parent Trap, casting. I casted people that I'd always seen all my life growing up as a child, Adolphe Menjou and Charlie Ruggles, God, whom I just loved, adored.
Oh, that's Pollyanna, right?
I know, that's Parent Trap. I'm mixing the two of them.
Yeah, so let's talk Parent Trap to start.
Okay, Parent Trap.
Just a second. Also talk about the locations, because you would have...
The California wine country.
Yeah.
Oh, all right, Pollyanna, that's Pollyanna. Pollyanna,
No.
yeah.
Parent Trap.
Well, I was up there too.
Monterey or Carmel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it was a German book, so, you know,
See,
you
I would
must
think,
have
how did you
totally-
envision the locations?
Talk about the
and
writing of the script and...
Oh,
from
all
the
right.
German book.
Well, do you want to go to Parent Trap, in other words? You want to skip
Right.
Pollyanna? Okay. Because Pollyanna was in the same area. I don't know how we ended up up north.
Pollyanna for a few minutes and
Okay.
then go on to...
Pollyanna and Parent Trap were more or less in the same area. One was Napa Valley, one was above San Francisco. It was pretty much the same place. We shot in Carmel on Parent Trap and Napa Valley on Pollyanna. Pollyanna, we were looking for Victorian homes, obviously. We found them up there. We found an adorable little railroad station in this little town, which I went back to visit. It's all overgrown with weeds now and falling apart, the glad town. We did find the Victorian house where Pollyanna lived and climbed the tree and fell. So that's why we shot up there. A lot of the shots were discovery shots. We'd be traveling around with a truck with this huge crane flying through Napa Valley, and I saw this huge water wheel. And we stopped the truck and we'd throw the actor in and shoot Jimmy with his hoop going past the water wheel, just because we've never seen a water wheel before. And we were driving in the truck one day, and here come a bunch of sheep down the road we'd never seen before. So stop the truck, put Jimmy in there, give the sheep herder $10 so he can use his sheep, and Jimmy wheels the hoop through the sheep, and one falls down, caught it on camera. Just opportunity shooting, it's called, with a great cameraman, Russ Harlan, who's no longer with us. Great times.
Just basically driving around and seeing these
Yes.
terrific shots.
Yes,
I
it's
love
a lovely
that.
place.
Was it a residence, a Victorian house?
It
a
was
Spanish house?
in Santa Rosa, and a lot of Victorian homes up there. And
Paul's my husband's brother lives in Santa
really,
Rosa. Yeah.
it's a lovely town to live in. Jumping to Parent Trap, the cast there, I adored all of them. I'm a little naive with actors who drink and use drugs. I didn't realize that Brian Keith had a bottle problem because he'd try and cover it so well. Lovely man. Tried to put a move on Joanna Barnes. He broke down her door at the motel. We had to get the police and stuff. One of the little incidents, but he drinks a lot. He was a good Irish drinker. Grew up with John Wayne movies. You got to drink when you work with the Duke. No incredible incidents on that.
How about the locations going from the vision? Here's a German book, and you're going to adapt it as the all-American film.
Well, in the little short story, the two girls did meet in a camp, so that was an easy adaptation. It was just, in America, I did get the idea of separating them east and west, so one grew up with a proper Bostonian accent, which Haley could do easily, because we had Haley. I had to do that. And the Western accent she had a little more trouble with until I taught her how Americans speak. They don't move their lips or their jaws. They do like this. Then she caught onto that because the French and the English are moving their lips and their jaws, and we have those lazy jaws. She finally got onto that, and she caught the Western girl pretty well. The book was easy to adapt.
But what
No
about
problems.
The little touches, like, her dog Andromeda comes out, doesn't know.
I don't know. It comes. I had a dog. I had two girls growing up at that time. I don't know. It just, your past life comes out in script form, I guess.
Did you have input as far as, where they're going over when the girls are going into isolation and they've got the, not Bridge Over the River Kwai, they're whistling?
Colonel Bogey's March.
Yeah.
Colonel Bogey's March.
I mean, so little things like that are throughout the entire film. Are those your touches?
Aren't you nice?
Yeah, I love the film. I mean, it's things like that made it what it is.
Well, I don't know where they come from. It's hard. That's a hard question to answer. Things you store away in your mental library, most of it, well, let's give credit where it's due. I studied films. I ran, my hero was Preston Sturges, and I would run his films hour after hour. The Lady Eve, I must have run 50 times. Watched how he staged things in Sullivan's Travels. Masterful staging. His dialogue was crisp. There was no waiting. It was quick and cut and go, and not cut. He'd stage things into one shot that build close-ups and that would move to 2 shots, to 3 shots, to 4 shots in one shot, one camera angle. And his dialogue was always crisp. There was no wasted words or anything. Get to the point, start the love affair, take the pratfall, get your laugh, go home. I wish I'd known him. I studied John Ford films, who wouldn't move the camera. He moved the actors to the camera. He would pan. Now and then he'd dolly a little, but not much. But he used the background and the actors worked to his camera. Today, they take the camera into toilets. Doesn't help much, but I appreciate the staging that the old directors did, the Cukors and the Lewis Milestones.
Well, you have to think about it a lot more.
Yes.
In that respect, instead of moving the camera, you need to think about your action.
How are the actors relating to each other? Not when do I get my close-up?
Exactly.
How are they working ensemble? Is it the old theatrical term?
How did you handle the double shooting on Parent Trap?
In an archaic fashion that they didn't use on the next Parent Trap.
Okay, can we start with
Sure. The Parent
Phil?
Trap, and when we made the Parent Trap in 1960, we didn't have access to the modern technology that they did on the second Parent Trap, where they used all sorts of marvelous inventions. We had to cover one half of the camera, and Haley would do one half of the scene talking to her double over here, which wasn't photographed. When she'd finish that, we'd cover this side, we'd roll the film back, and she'd switch places and she'd talk again, she'd play the other character. It was very cumbersome, but she handled it adroitly and without complaint. Now and then I had to say, wait a minute, you're the Brit, and now you're the Yank, back and forth, but we did it. Cumbersome.
How did that? Was it? You shooting twice as long? I mean, how much longer would you say it took you to shoot then?
I don't know, because at that time I had relaxed into feature film production. If I were television, I could tell you to the minute, but it was
Obviously
feature
it
film. It
wasn't.
didn't. No, who cares? And they're making a feature film, which is marvelous. It's exciting. No 3-day shoot like television. Alcoa Goodyear.
But I mean, it's daunting to think that the whole movie is going to have to be shot with that continuity in
Yes.
mind every shot.
And it worked somehow. When I had laid the big bombs I did in New York finally in television, I got bored with writing, and I looked up Gadge Kazan, whom I'd known through my wife and other actor friends I had, and I said, Gadge, I want to become a director. I don't want to write anymore. I'm sick of it. Well, how do I become a director? He said, go to the actor's studio. And I said, I don't want to act. I want to direct. He says, you've got to go there so you can when actors talk, you've got to be able to separate the shit from the truth. And he said, they'll try and con you every minute, but you've got to know their truth and their language. And if you don't have it, you won't know which is which. So I went and studied there I hated it. Hated every minute of it. But I did see how, I did read Stanislavski. They made me read Stanislavski. I saw how they worked their muscles and tensions, preparing. And one of the things that Strasberg made you do, he made you stand up on the stage and tell exactly what you saw and heard and smelled from the time you got up to the time you walked into the actor's studio. And it's very interesting. It tests the muscle up here to record what you're seeing and smelling and hearing around you every day, like right now. And you become acutely aware of what's happening around you and what other directors are doing and what actors are doing. It sort of put things into focus for me.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Nice observation.
So
Should we move on to the
yeah, well,
young
on to the
tree
Parent
and-
Trap.
Parent Trap.
I want to talk about your wonderful. Let me see quickly here.
I know.
Love is a Ball. Do you
We-
want to go
we
down that
pause?
road? With
No, I'd like to
George?
tell you. I'd like to tell you.
Actually, I want to ask a question. Did you have any idea that the Parent Trap was going to be the
No.
runaway success
No.
it was, and what happened?
I knew nothing
Yeah.
about them.
Tell us
I have
a
that
bit about
question.
it. Oh.
Ask it.
Oh, okay.
A terrific answer. What was your feeling going into it? Did you feel it would be such a hit? So let's start with that. And then,
Talking
And
about.
then- And then what do we do?
well, David was just going to tell me, love is a ball, or
I'll get to that right after
Okay.
this.
Okay.
Speaking of the Parent Trap, I didn't know what a hit was. Don't forget, I was new to the film business. I had come out of television. I knew what a television hit was because I had one for 5 years on NBC, but I didn't know what a hit movie was, nor did I know the components or what the market was. So I didn't know. I'm glad the two pictures turned out the way they did. I was happy with them, except they were too long. But at the end, after the preview at the old Writers Guild Theater, do you remember that on Melrose? They previewed Pollyanna, and a lot of motion picture people came. And I didn't know that at the time. But the next week, my agent called and said, they want to see you over at Columbia Pictures. And I said, what about? And they said, just take the meeting. So I went over to Columbia, and Sam Briskin was running it, and they wanted to hire me. And they offered me a producer, director, writer contract. I had my own unit at a lot of money, more than Disney, incidentally. Disney never paid me anything or gave me any kind of a contract. I was working on a week to week, for 2 years. Never signed me on any contract. So during the shooting of Parent Trap, I had agreed to this contract, and Walt met me in the hall and said, how's it going? I said, it's going fine, Walt. I said, but I've got some news for you. I'm going to leave you. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I've signed a deal with Columbia. And Walt was bigoted, and he said he slipped into this bad Jewish dialect that he did so bad. He said, oh, so you're going to go work for them, fellas over there? Well, good luck to you. And that was the end of that. He never forgave me, really. I came back once to give a lecture to the directors at Disney's on 5-camera technique, which I was using on how to succeed in business. And I walked into the restaurant over there, and all the directors were sitting at the table waiting for me, and Walt's in the back table, and he says, hey, Bud Swift, in a big loud voice. He's sitting with Julie Andrews, and their picture has just won the award. They won the Academy Award she has for
Sound of Music?
No.
Oh, this was earlier.
for Mary Poppins.
Mary Poppins.
He yells out at the top of his voice, he says, you see, we got this award here. We can make pictures without you. In a big loud voice to everybody in the restaurant. I'm over there to do him a favor, to show the director something that I found out about.
That's too bad.
Yeah,
That's
we had a
too
nice
bad.
relationship, but he never forgave me for leaving.
I find it interesting that you would be lecturing on 5-camera technique after your initial take two.
Isn't that funny?
That's wonderful.
Isn't that funny?
Um,
Oh, I go over to, at Disney had one Jew and one black at the studio. The black he hid down in the basement in the editing department. The Jew he couldn't hide because he was a top storyman, Otto Englander, very top storyman. So he was up on the 3rd floor. So I came from that milieu over to Columbia, where I was the only goy. I walked into the executive dining room that first day, and here's a table, one long table with Harry Cohn at one end, and all these famous names from Freddie Zinnemann on down, Otto Preminger, all the great directors and producers sitting there. And I was cowed. I didn't know one of them, and I was sort of backing out. I was going to go and eat at McDonald's or someplace, when this little guy comes up to me and he says, hi there, who are you? And I said, I'm David Swift. And he introduced himself. He says, I'm Bobby Cohn. Come on, I'll introduce you to everybody. And Bobby Cohn became my dear friend, like a brother to me. And we did my first picture there called The Interns at Columbia. A dear, sweet man, one of my dear friends I lost 2 years ago. That was my introduction to Columbia. Happy experience there, not too bad, nice people.
Now let's talk about.
Let's talk about The Interns.
Interns.
I love that movie. I saw it.
Did?
Yeah.
Nobody ever saw it, I don't think.
Are his hands too close in your shot?
I don't think so.
Okay.
The first film, Columbia, was The Interns, which I loved. Bobby Cohn gave me the script. I helped write it with another very talented writer. And I don't know, what can I say? Still television hanging over my head. My past experience in television, we only had $1.1 million for a budget, and I came in under budget because I'd shoot 14 pages a day. It was fine because they were young actors, and they could take the energy and the input, and I was young, and boom, 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 and I had a fast cameraman, Russ Meddy, from Universal, from television days. He was fast, and it was black and white, and we could move fast. So we were knocking at 12 to 14 pages a day. Now they're lucky if they do 2. But we got it out because they were kids and they would adapt and they'd run here and they'd do this and do that. The opening shot down at General Hospital shooting. Arrival of interns from all over the world. Asians, blacks, Hindus, they're all coming in their suits. They're coming to do their internship. And on action, they all start marching up the steps, hundreds of them, going to become interns at this hospital. And I take one look and I'm horrified and I yell, "Cut! What the hell is this?" They're all carrying the same blue suitcase from all over the world. These were the days where the prop men were paid off and the art directors for putting known brands in pictures. And this dumb art director, prop man, had taken a under-the-table money and hired and got the use of all these suitcases, not thinking, and gave them to these guys. We had to stop production. That was my introduction to under-the-table takes on props. Still goes on today, as you know. Interns. Cliff Robertson and I had worked before at Alcoa Goodyear. Susie Parker had never acted before. She was quite fun to work with. Nothing special. The picture, finished it. Telly Savalas, powerful on-screen personality, marvelous. We became close friends. I used him in another picture, Love is a Ball, took him to Europe with me, where he proceeded to lose all his money at the gaming tables. A true Greek gambler, loved to gamble.
So he was in Love is a Ball, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Walter Newman, I should say the screenplay was by Walter Newman on Interns. Did a fine job. I just added a couple of little things and piggishly took credit with him. But anyway, he wrote a fine script. Love is a Ball was next. I'm married to a Swiss lady, French is her first language, and she's from Switzerland, and we were going to shoot over in the Riviera. So I leapt at it, had a cast of Glenn Ford. I didn't know he was a star. I didn't know him. But he had Charles Boyer, whom I adored. So that hooked me. I said, let's do it. And you're flown in first class, your family, your children, your nurse, everybody, flown in first class. It's nice being a director. And put up at the best hotel in the Riviera. French crew. I knew a little French, enough to say stop, go, back up. Fun experience, except for Glenn Ford, who Frank Capra hated, and I can see why.
What was the problem there?
Glenn had an image of himself as Glenn Ford with the guns and the horses and things, and he was the man. And it didn't emerge until one day I'm shooting on Agnelli's estate down there. Agnelli is the owner of Fiat, and he has an estate in every country of the world. But he'd loaned us this magnificent estate to shoot on. And I shot up near the front door, and Glenn, we had to give a Mercedes, a gull wing Mercedes, a beautiful gull wing. We had to give one of those to Glenn to use in the picture, and he was going to keep it afterwards. So I finished that shot, moved down the driveway, which is about 100 yards down to the gates down there to shoot the entrance, get ready, lined up, ready to go. And I said, "Oh, okay, let's rehearse." And the assistant said, "We can't, sir. We don't have the sound equipment here." And I said, why not? The camera's ready. Where's the sound equipment? He said, "Mr. Ford is using it up above." And I said, "Mr. Ford is what? An actor is using the equipment?" I ran up the hill and I said, "What is going on here?" Glenn says, "Well, Dave, I want believability in this picture, so I'm recording the slam of the car door so we know we have the real Mercedes sound." And I blew. I said, "Don't you ever say a word to the crew at any point, the camera, the sound, or anything. This is a company that you don't run. You don't do things like that. You just act. Know your words and get out on the camera." And in Glenn's mind, he should have decked me right there. He should have gone 1, 2, boom, I would have been on my butt. But he didn't. And he got even with me many times in the future after that. He 4 o'clock would come. He'd wait till I had 200 or 300 extras. Then he'd say, "Whoa, it's my time to go home now. No more." And I'd say, "What do you mean?" He says, "Read my contract." And he'd walk off. And I'd be stuck there with all the extras and couldn't do it. He got even. And Frank Capra's book came out in which he exercised his version of Glenn Ford.
Now we know why.
Yeah.
Ricardo Montalban was also in
Ricardo, and also at the time, I used in television, friend of mine, Grace Kelly, whom I used to date, made a film for Philco called The Rich Boy, one of F. Scott Fitzgerald's famous stories. And in it they cast Grace and Jean Lyons, who was also a friend of mine, and they fell in love. I mean, that was her one big love, was Jean Lyons, a handsome Irish actor, good actor. He was in Witness for the Prosecution. He played the lead in that on the stage. And one night I was doing a rewrite at NBC. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Script had to be done for Fred the next day. And there was nobody in all of NBC except me and the typewriter. And I opened the closet there, and here were all must have been 200 or 300 kinescopes piled up in there, because in those days it was live and we'd kinescope for the West Coast. And I looked at the top one, and it was Grace Kelly and The Rich Boy. So I took it home with me. This is the only copy in existence of the world of Grace Kelly and Jean Lyons. And I had it at home. So I thought, well, I'll bet Grace would like that. She's now the princess. So I packed it in my trunk and took it over with me and gave it to her over there. And she went crazy for it. She just loved it. In so doing, she met my wife, and they fell in love with each other. She and Micheline became very close friends. We were walk into the palace anytime we want. Our children went to school with their kids. They were the same age. We'd been married the same year, so they were going to school in the palace instead of the public school over there. They thought every kid grew up that way. They're now 6 and 5, I think. Interesting entree into what royalty is like. I remember sitting at dinner, a birthday dinner for Rainier, gold service, a servant. There were 35 people, as I recall, at this big table, and a servant for each guest sat behind you and took care of just one person. That was you. My guest was, who was it? I know that Micheline sat next to Onassis, and she asked him what he did, and my guest was his girlfriend. Who was the great singer? Maria Callas, who was charming. I found out she's American. I didn't know that. She speaks better English than I do. She speaks every language. Being an opera star, she spoke German and Italian and French and everything. She was a delight. And Micheline came over after dinner and said, "What do you do to her?" And she said, "I sing a little." And they got along great. But it was my first look at how royalty lived, and I've always been impressed by it. Ricardo and his wife, Georgiana, were guests in the house, too, quite often. She liked them very much. And as I say, Grace and Micheline became very good friends. We were having dinner one night, the four of us, a little restaurant, a little French restaurant we'd taken them to in Monte Carlo. And Micheline and Grace decided to walk home alone. Rainey and I grabbed his car and we drove back to the palace. And Micheline told me as they were walking along, she said, do you ever have any free time? Do you do anything outside of what the Red Cross and all this? And she says, do you have any outside interests, any love affairs, anything going on? She says, I couldn't do it, Micheline. And she said, why not? She said, look behind you. And Micheline looked behind. There, 2 guys about a block back, walking behind them in black suits, and they're with her all the time, wherever she goes. She says, I have no free life. I can't do anything on my own. And that's sort of a sad story. You mentioned Good Neighbor Sam. I think of Eddie G. Robinson, a dear man, became a good friend. And on one of my trips to Europe later, I brought it to Switzerland, where Cuban cigars are in easy supply. I brought back a box of Monte Cristos, which are barred in America, obviously, and they were in my luggage. And I go through clearance at New York, and the immigration guy opens it up, and there's the box. He says, uh-oh, and he takes them out, and I said, well, they're not for me. I don't smoke cigars. They're for Eddie G. Robinson. He said, the actor? And I said, yes. He said, you know him? I said, yes, he was in a picture I made. And he takes them, he puts them back in the suitcase and says, tell him how much I love him. Eddie was thrilled with those cigars because he was a big cigar smoker. We had parties on my sets. I forgot to tell you, all the pictures, we always celebrated birthdays. We'd shut down production for birthdays. And when I got to, we started to make funny birthdays, not just birthday cakes. Birthday cakes that would blow up, birthday cakes that would deflate, they'd go sideways, they would scream, they'd sound anything. And everybody was scared to cut a cake, finally. But they were fun times. Eddie Robinson, we gave a new one to. We were shooting on a dairy out in the valley with cows moving all the time, which gave great background. He was the egg king, I think, or so. I don't know what we were doing with the cows, and the milk king. And the cows left a lot of excrement around. And the prop man built a cake at my suggestion. It was made from the part of the cow that you don't use. And we covered it with beautiful frosting and said, happy birthday, Eddie Robinson. And he said, oh, aren't you kind? He didn't know about our birthday cakes. He was a newcomer to the set. And he started to cry, and he cut the cake. And it was awfully juicy inside. And he got another ladle, and suddenly the smell hit him, and he said, oh, my God, and threw the cake and everything at us. There were always birthday parties. I don't know what that leads up to. Nothing, probably.
I can't. It's so hard for me to laugh off my with you. Well, let's talk about Good Neighbor Sam and working with a cast like Edward G. Robinson.
Yeah, let's just talk about the genesis of each movie.
All right, Good Neighbor Sam. I read the book, loved it, bought it, but this time I produced it myself, and I brought in Jim Fritzell and Everett Greenbaum to write the screenplay with me. They were fun. That was a nice reunion after all those years. They were writing Don Knotts and what was Andy Griffith shows. It was a happy reunion. We had fun, and I'll give you a picture of them, Angela, of them on the set. Remind me. Nothing spectacular. We made the movie. A lot of fun. Louis Nye was hysterical in it. Funny actor, funny man. Jack Lemmon, a delight to work with. I've done Under the Yum Yum Tree with him prior to that. He's a professional, always ready, always happy, never pouts, never asks for anything special. Just an actor's actor, a dream to work with.
So Good Neighbor Sam had
just a little bit.
Oh, just the rattling.
Yeah, just a little bit. Sorry.
Good Neighbor
Sam.
Sam.
You know, he pretends to be married to his neighbor, Romy Schneider.
Yes.
Correct? And a lot of gags and sight gags and car chases and such.
Romy Schneider. We had the big junk sculpture that Jack was supposed to have built, which cost a fortune, but it was interesting. A lot of people do junk sculpture these days.
Junk sculpture?
Oh, yes. They take stuff that's thrown away and make a statue out of it and win awards. This one had old mattress springs and saxophones and bicycle wheels, and it moved. It came alive when you threw the switch.
But how did you come up with the premise for Good Neighbor Sam?
I didn't. It was a book by Jack Finley. Jack Finley.
That's right.
Finney.
It's not-
Jack Finney.
Jack Finney.
Jack
So,
Finney.
But when you went to adapt it, did you think of the cast? Did you have Jack Lemmon in mind? Or how
Yes.
did that come about?
I took it to Jack, and he loved it, the book. I said, read this. It's better than Yum Yum Tree. And he read it. He was shooting something for Billy Wilder at the time. I forget what. Not The Apartment. Anyway.
Something like it hot? No.
No.
It's not.
No, it was one in Paris with... anyway.
Lemonade.
Yes, Irma Ladouce. And he read it on the set while I was shooting that and said, I love it, let's do it. And we made the picture. I don't know what to say about it.
Okay, let's move on then to Under the Yum Yum Tree.
That was
Which
first.
That was before.
That was first, yeah.
That was the year before.
Yeah. Under the Yum Yum Tree. Fade out. I don't know. We made a picture. After that, what came after that?
How to Succeed?
How to Succeed. Oh, I loved the play. I just adored it. When it came on the market, before Columbia wouldn't buy it for me. It was too much money they wanted. The deal was very rough. The Mirish bought it, United Artists. So I called the Mirish. I didn't know them, and I said, I want to do this picture. What does it take? And they said, we'd love to have you. We worked out a deal. I loved the project. My favorite project, I think, of all time.
Why?
Because it had great writing by Abe Burrows, and it was full of vivacity and charm, and it sort of spelled what the world of business was like, which had never been done before. Opportunism and deceit, duplicity, everything was in there, but told with laughs. And what could be better than that? And I just loved it. And Hollywood right away, United Artists wanted to cast it with stars. The deal they had made was so tough that I couldn't afford it. I had to make that film for $2.3 million. Not make a musical for $2.3 million, but two versions, because in those days musicals weren't working abroad, so they didn't want to take any chances. So I had to write scenes to replace the musical numbers. In other words, the theme of it's been a long day, been a long. I had to put into dialogue and play a whole scene. So I'd shoot the musical number, and then we'd rack back, and I'd start again, and we'd play the scene. Then the actors would have to go over and brush up on the scene, and we'd shoot the scene. So I made two versions of How to Succeed in Business for $2,300,000. Hard to believe, but again, shooting with television speed and knowledge of how to schedule your sets and actors. Incidentally, the first Parent Trap was made for $2.1 million. The second Parent Trap, did you know that it cost almost $70 million? $70 million. I don't know what they spent it on. Can you imagine spending a story about two children trying to get their parents to go back together for $70 million? Anyway.
How could you? And you're not paying stars.
No, that's right.
I mean, you had Natasha Richardson, but I mean, come on, you're not paying.
No.
$70 million.
How to Succeed.
So was
It's
there
an
anything-
easy adaptation because everything was there. It didn't require. That's the easiest adaptation in the world. Anybody could have done that. You could have taken the craft service man and said, "Here's a typewriter, do it," because Abe Burrows had it all down. But this is the amazing thing. I'm suddenly back working with the man, not really working with him, but I'm doing a picture of a play produced by the man who gave me my first job as a writer, Ernie Martin. Ernie Martin and Cy Fior produced this on Broadway, and now I'm making it as a movie. That's what's so phenomenal. And Ernie is one of my closest friends. He and Bobby Cohn are my closest friends. It's amazing. Round and round.
Full circle.
The ronde.
How often, say Abe Burrows, Willie Gilbert, all the people whose work you adapted, were they involved? How often
No,
did you?
they weren't. It wasn't necessary. They couldn't add anything more because it was almost perfect. There was one section and it should be cut, and I can't get them to agree to it. But no, there wasn't nothing additional to do. It's just transferring it from stage to film. I insisted on using the cast of Rudy Valley and Michelle Lee and Bobby Morse because I had no time to make the film. I had to turn it in for a certain price. I think it was $2.5. I couldn't go over $2.5 or $2.8, I forget, or the deal was off. That's the way it is. So we did it, and some of the musical numbers worked fine. Interesting about casting here, I wanted Scooter Teague, who played Bud Frump in the stage, and I sent the casting people out to get him. They said, no, he's been drafted. He's in the Navy. I said, damn it, I need him because he knows the part. So I call a friend of mine in Washington, Ray Bell, who actually was the Columbia lobbyist in Washington. Get him on the phone. I said, Ray, I need a favor. This guy's in the Navy. He said, tell me his name, I'll get him for you. Scooter Teague. He says, hold on. He doesn't put me on hold. He lets the speaker open, and he dials a number. He gets the Secretary of the Navy on the phone in one phone call. And he says, yes, okay. Well, gee, that's very nice. I'll appreciate that very much, Fred. And he says, guess where he is? He's on a submarine. He just left San Diego. I said, damn it. He said, don't worry. He said, they're turning the submarine around. They're bringing him back to San Diego, which they did. The Secretary of the Navy ordered the submarine back. They released Scooter Teague for 6 months to me. Is that a crazy story? And he helped make this film a reality because he knew the part. He worked with all these people. He'd worked with Michelle Lee and Bobby and Rudy.
That was a fabulous story. That's a good one.
Rudy Valley is the second cheapest man in the world, right after Adolphe Menjou. He would steal pennies out of a blind man's cup. He's so funny. To his last day, we had a makeup man on the film called Bob Schiffer, who I'm going to put on the CD for Parent Trap and all that. He was he's head of makeup at Disney's, and to the day Rudy died, he kept going back to Bob Schiffer at Disney's to get a free haircut. Can you believe that? Driving all the way to the Valley to get a free haircut.
Amazing. That's amazing.
How
to succeed.
Should we go into the craft questions now? I think we're.
Yeah, I just want to know, you had the deal at Columbia, and after that,
I got fired.
oh yeah? What happened?
She likes that. Okay, so tell us what came about with Columbia after this.
Columbia, they offered me, after I finished How to Succeed, they offered me Funny Girl, and I turned it down. I didn't want to work with Streisand. I had a happy family life. I enjoyed living. And I knew she was a ball breaker. And I turned it down. Well, they weren't happy about that because they just bought Funny Girl. And an idol of mine, Willie Wyler, took it for very little money. He was dying to do it, and it killed him, I think. I think he died soon after that. She was a very demanding lady, I understand. I just didn't want to work with her. So then they offered me another plum. Would have won an Academy Award with it. Oliver. I loved that play. Oh, one of the great projects of all time. But I said, I had to be honest with them. I said, I shouldn't direct this. You should have an English director for it because it's an English story. And they hired a marvelous English director, and he won the Academy Award. The picture won 5 Academy Awards. But it was right. I wouldn't have done it as well as he did. That's what happened. Then they fired me. I turned down 2 movies. I was drawing salary, pay or play, and they dumped me.
After these hits, after these wonderful films?
Go figure. I wasn't an asset anymore. I wasn't turning out 2 pictures a year, you know.
You did for between Parent Trap, Pollyanna, and your Candle Shoe experience. There was a lot of family films
And also some television shows. Grindle. And I did Grindle. I did Camp Runamuck in between.
Was there a certain attraction for a family program or family films that you liked?
No, it just happened at Disney's. They were family filmed. It was the trademark of Disney. Once it crossed over to the other side of the hill, it was screeching tires and broken glass.
But you could do both, which is amazing.
Well, anybody can.
David, did you always want to be a writer?
No. No, you want more than that, don't you? Just no, yes,
That would
no,
be nice.
yeah, no. No, I didn't always want to be a writer. I wrote because I didn't want to be an animator. I was working at Disney's, and I was not making much money. I think $45 a week. Well, that was a lot of money in those days. $45 a week as an assistant. But we were all unhappy, all of us artists. We'd go to lunch at the cafeteria, and we'd eat our lunch and grouse about conditions. But over there, at the head of the cafeteria, was at one table, and everybody was laughing and having fun and telling jokes. And it turned out they were the writers. And it suddenly dawned on me there was a better life. So I wanted to be that happy life, so I switched, and as I say, I fell in love with a girl who wanted a radio show and wrote one for it. Became a writer. No. Do I like to write? The answer to that, I have to quote Dorothy Parker. She said, I hate writing, but I love having written. And it's true for me, too. It's a good craft, and I admire the writers, but I'm just sort of a adapter guy who makes pictures.
Go ahead.
I admire the writers who write original screenplays. That's a tremendous craft, especially the good ones. I don't do that.
Once you've gotten an idea for a story, how do you go about constructing the screenplay? Or once you've read something that you like, how do you go about constructing the screenplay?
I use a storyboard, like as they taught me at Disney's, and then I break down the scenes in my mind as a director of how many pages it's going to be in a scene, so that I don't want to end up with too large a script, because that's dreadful to end up with a 200-page script and have to edit as a brute. So it's usually pre-blocked in my mind's eye as a director how I want that scene to go and how many pages it's worth. And then I try to cut one page out of that to make it briefer. Because I found out, being a director, the first time I sat in a projection booth to look at dailies, what seems pertinent and quick and fast and delightful on the set is absolutely boring in a projection room. It never moves fast enough. So I got in the habit of, once I got a take I liked, I'd call for another shot, another rehearsal. I'd say, this time to the actors, talk as fast as you can. Let's just experiment and see what happens. And it's usually the take I'd use. Because when I got to the projection room, the first one would be slow that I thought was good. And I want their minds to work faster. I don't want these Glenn Ford pauses in between while he thinks about what does he want, an egg or an omelet, 10
It's
minutes.
Real Friday dialogue.
Oh, yes.
I'm showing that in my film class.
It goes on and on.
Yeah, it's just amazing. How would you define structure?
I don't know. I have no idea. It's a word I don't know.
They always say that. I don't know.
I don't know what structure
What does
is.
it mean? What if...
Well, in the old days, it was first act, second act, third act. I don't know what it's become. Now it's become a short story that's elongated into a film. So I don't think there is any one explanation of structure.
But for you, is it 3 acts?
No. Well, I suppose in a way there's a nadir at some point, and then there's the ecclesiastical high point at the end where everybody leaves happy and singing the hit song. I don't know. 3 coins in the fountain.
In a screenplay, what's the difference? This is a good one for you. What's the difference between good dialogue and just talk?
Well, being a comedy writer, it has to amuse, and if it's a comedy, in a drama like The Interns, the scene has to hold, take stage. good dialogue. There used to be, in the old days, additional dialogue credit. They would have a screenplay, and then they'd bring in a New York writer like Donald Ogden Stewart, and he would write additional dialogue, and they'd pay him $3,000 a week. Dorothy Parker would do the same thing. These were the men who put the smart lines into a lot of the pictures. But there aren't many Donald Ogden Stewarts around these days. Good dialogue is pertinent dialogue, I guess, and it raises some doubts and questions in the audience. It piques and amuses somebody to listen to them, so that you're not throwing a body through glass. You're listening to the dialogue. I guess I don't know what else to say.
No, that's a good answer. That's fine. I mean, you're looking
Okay,
for.
sorry. Go on.
It's hard for me to answer that question. Good dialogue is an intriguing subject, aptly told, isn't it? I don't know how else to express it. But we're in the business of entertaining. Are you entertaining with the dialogue, or is it just something, a pillow talk? Is it something we've heard before?
Well, when you're adapting something and you look at this and you look at the original work and you think, oh, I would keep that line in, or not necessarily the line, but the idea, and I'm going to write around this main idea because this is going to be great dialogue.
It goes through one's head. It's your selectivity, that writer. He's going to select what he thinks is pertinent and right for that screen, and what entertains him.
How do you know that when you look at a piece?
Well, I suppose first the story has to intrigue one, the storyline, what it's about. Is it unusual, or is it just another boy meets girl story, told in a different way maybe? If that intrigues you, then you know that you like the story, so you're going to write interesting characters. We'll speak different dialogue than you've heard at the corner grocery store. Something that is unique. I used to tell the students at UCLA and USC to forget everything they've seen and heard and try and do something that no one has seen and heard. To write a different kind of the subject matter, but write it differently, because everyone reacts differently to a given problem or a given love or a given hate. People react differently. Do it your way, or do it the way one of your characters would do it, rather than just following a rote of how you saw it in somebody else's movie, how Peter Lorre did it, or how Jennifer Jones played a love scene, or Cary Grant flirted with somebody. Write it differently and see if you can sell it.
And we've kind of gone over this, but I wonder if you could expand on it. You do have particular actors in mind when you're writing a part?
Not really, no. Unless it's a star who's already committed to the film, then I have to. But no, I write the part and then cast it. I would suggest to writers, to beginning writers, to read an article in this week's New Yorker about a different kind of writing, about a writer called Ron Bass. Fascinating. 10 pages of a factory writer who hires 6 people, 6 assistants to feed him. It's a scary story, and not. It sort of epitomizes what Hollywood has become today. I had it so easy. I never had anybody interfere with my screenplays. I write them and shoot them, and that's sort of rare. In today's market, you have 15, 20 people. I hate to say it, but they're called D-girls, development girls. They're always women. I don't know why. And they sit and pick your script apart, and then the next person down the line says, well, I don't agree. I think it should go this way. And the next person says, no, you're wrong. It should go this way. And you get so muddled, I don't know how you ever get your idea up on the screen. I didn't have that, so I'm spoiled. I have been spoiled by the movie business. I haven't had to participate and cooperate and vitiate the words in my scripts. I just shot what I wanted. It's not going to happen anymore. If you read this article about Ron Bass,
I have to read that. I met him.
oh,
Words into pictures.
it's frightening. It's frightening to see what he has to put up with.
Are there particular problems that you usually see in scripts or when you're trying to adapt? Is there always a particular set of problems, or if there are, what are they?
There haven't been, because the projects I've acquired to work on have been so complete in themselves. They've been very simple to do. Very simple. The basic ideas and characters were there. I'm not a person who sits down and writes an original screenplay. I admire them, but I'm not one of those.
Well, how about when you, excuse me, when you're producing and writing, you've written a project and you're going to direct it, how do you mesh the aesthetics with the writing with the direction? In other words, technically, is this going to work if I have him say this line while he walks over here, but I don't want to cut that line? How do you blend your vision as producer, your written word, with what's going to work technically?
The question is, how do I equate all the different phases that I do, the producing, the budgeting, the writing, the directing, the casting, all of these things. And how do I know what's going to work? I can't answer that. I guess it's the experience of a lifetime of working in radio and television, and scene after scene after scene, what works and what doesn't, what timing works, what doesn't. Am I bored behind the camera by what the actor's doing? Is the scene alive? A lot of scenes are dead, and they go on the screen dead. They don't, evidently the editors and the director don't see it. Scenes play out for minutes and minutes, and it's just boring. And you have either you have or don't have an innate sense of how much a scene is worth, and whether it should be culminated quicker or lengthened. I don't know how to prepare any student for that. I can only tell you that a lot of directors make a mistake by having too many curtains in a film. They'll write a sequence and then they'll direct it and they'll put a curtain on it, a big climax, quarter of the way through. There'll be another 10 pages, and there'll be another climax. And it's a series of fade-outs almost. We don't use fade-outs anymore, but it's a series of climaxes through a film that exhaust the audience, just exhaust them. I think there should be a progression, a natural progression to story, and entertaining scenes along the way. It's hard to pinpoint that. I'm not a professor of screenwriting.
Well, you're the success story of screenwriting. Isn't that formula though, where they're told every 10 pages there has to be, before the denouement there has to be the action, and then you're going to wrap that scene, and then
they call it an arc now. I don't know what an arc is, but it's called an arc. And at first it confused me. I didn't know what they were talking about. This arc should end here, or the arc should be here. I don't know what the hell they're talking about. I really don't. And I can't advise anybody, but this is a D-girl phrase now. It's very in, arcing. I don't know what it means.
When you, what are the most helpful tricks you've learned when you adapt a screenplay?
To to end up with a decent-sized screenplay is to play the scene in your mind that you've just written, and then allocate it, or finish the script, and then read the script through. Take a scene, read it in your mind of how long, and the responses and sentences that you think it should play. And you'll end up with a decent screenplay. That's all I can say. You tend, I guess that's the director part, you tend to pace the actors through a film, and as you write it and as you edit it. And I don't know how anyone else does it. I just time it out with a stopwatch. I read it to myself and figure out this scene is only worth this much. And if it's going too long, then I'll edit it.
How much stage direction do you put in those scenes?
Very little. I learned long ago that as a screenwriter, you don't want to tell the director what to do. I don't, because I'm directing it too. But the director is a very important function, obviously not as important as the writer. God bless them. They think they are. That, don't get me started on that personal credit for the director, which I hate. A film by it should be a film by the author, interpreted by the director.
Well, let's just start with, have you ever had writer's block?
Not that I can remember.
Okay, let's try and do full. Let me rephrase
Not
that.
at writer's block. We're talking about writer's block. I don't remember it having it because I got into this business to make money, and that's really all it is to me. It's my craft, and I sit down and do it. So, and also, I've always had good projects that have been pre-written for me. I just had to adapt them, so I don't have writer's block. It's all, the writer's block came before I got hold of the project.
Pre-production, pre-writer's
Yes.
block. Yeah, but I think you're underplaying your role. You look at a piece of work, and somebody could give me a great story, and I love the book. Could I adapt it? Could I pick out the best parts of it? I mean, sitting there and saying, I've got to do this because by Monday, my paycheck's, that's what
Well,
I'm getting.
adapting a story, receiving a marvelous book or play or screenplay, and adapting it to a story, not screenplay, screen story, and adapting it to film is the craft. How do you delete? How do you edit? How do you choose? How do you select? From your past experience, what you have seen and heard and enjoyed and hated is the answer, I guess. You cull and you choose what you want, what appeals to you. If you're wrong, you don't work anymore. If you choose right, you've learned something. Like you've learned something either way. I don't know. I grew up in the days when you had an audience. You played to an audience. Radio was to an audience, and you got reactions from comedy or drama, and you sensed an audience's reaction, and you file that away, and you use it in the future when you're writing. It's very difficult, I suppose, to sit in a classroom and say, but where does that sense of knowledge come from? I don't have access to it. And I say, go get it. Go become an apprentice in the theater. I did that. I built sets. I painted. I put risers under the seats. I helped with the lighting. Go get the experience if you want to be a writer. A writer is like the acting class of Lee Strasberg's acting class, to ingest everything, to take everything into view and focus, and the smells and the responses and reactions and the psychology of nutty people, and put it all to work for you. That's how you get it.
When you have a piece of work and you're going to sit down and write for the day, or what is a regular writing day like for you?
Starts at 4 a.m. because the children were quiet. And that's when I started, because the children were sleeping. So I'd get up early at 3 o'clock and start at 4, and finishes at noon. And then I go have fun, play golf or go for a walk or whatever. That's my day. It still is that way.
I'm curious, when you go play golf, when you're doing things, are you back there honing, thinking?
No, not really.
You can let go of that at noon.
Mm-hmm. Because it was a job and it's done. Yeah, it's a craft.
Well, okay. What is your environment like when you write?
I have an office above the garage with all my little goodies, and it's like I have a drafting table where I draw sometimes. I'm still drawing cartoons and things from my past, but that's about all. Have a computer and a word processor, and I'm happy.
So you use all the newfangled technology and
I fought it for a long time. I stuck with the old Underwood that Jack Warner calls schmucks with Underwoods, you know.
Can you write anywhere? Is that your
Mhm.
writing space?
Yes, I can think of anywhere, and the thinking is the writing. So if I have a story problem, I can take a walk down to the beach and figure out the story points that I want, or ideas, and put them into a little recorder I carry, and come back and put them on paper. Yes, you can think your script any place. I can.
Now, when you are there any particular books that have affected you most, affected your work, or books that you like to have around you when you work?
all books have affected me. I'm so jealous of novelists and writers, from Margaret Mead to Sidney Sheldon. I wrote a play with Sidney Sheldon once. It was a disaster. Opened in London at the Queen's Theatre. Horrible play. I think it set a new record for closing. It closed in 5 days. Sidney loved it. He stayed for the opening night. I refused. After the dress rehearsal, I left. Flew out as fast as I could. But he bought himself a red cape, which he wore to the opening. Disaster time.
Okay.
Gomes, for the records. Don't ever go see it. If it plays, it won't play. But if you ever see it on a marquee, go past it.
What's it called?
Gomes.
Gomes?
Sidney and I sat down, we said, nobody's ever put a ghost on stage, and today we have the technology to do it. So we wrote a ghost story, a murder story. Very intriguing. But the English director, I flew them in to show them, took them to Disneyland to show them how they put the ghost on stage there, reflected through the mirrors. They went back, and when I went to dress rehearsal, they had the ghost hung on wires and swung her in, and she swayed back and forth like a hasty pudding production of Peter Pan. I was just horrified.
That was it.
Oh, the worst production I've ever seen in my life. Research, we're talking about. Research is individual in How to Succeed in Business. I saw the play several times. That was my research. Met with Frank Lesser, got his input on the numbers. Oh, interesting. The dance numbers. Bob Fosse, genius? Yes, big genius. Went to meet Bob Fosse in New York. He had just finished directing his first play with his wife. What the hell was it? I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, he had just finished directing his first play, and he'd gotten rave reviews, and he needed money, and he wanted to do How to Succeed in Business. Naturally, he was the choreographer. And I talked him out of it because I liked him so much. I said, don't do it. You're stepping backward. You've got a directorial credit. Go on, get another play. Do a film. You're a director now. I think it was the right move for him. He finally agreed not to. I used his assistant and all Fosse's dances, but I regret not having worked with him, with a genius, an unqualified mistake I made there.
Well, mentoring Bob Fosse is kind of a nice credit, too.
Yes, but I'd love to have worked with him.
It brings me back quickly to Under the Yum Yum Tree. Was everything always, well, obviously not, the direct title or working title? Who chose the titles?
It was the title of the play. Freddie Brisson produced it, and Roz Russell had input into it, his wife, and
I guess who made the decisions to keep it the same or to...
I think in those days they paid so much money for it that they wanted to use the title for whatever it was worth. But it was an intriguing title. I still don't know what it means, but it's from Gilbert and Sullivan, isn't it?
I think it's from the Mikado.
Have you seen Topsy Turvy?
Haven't seen it. I have
Oh,
a friend who did
delightful.
musical
Oh.
comedy, and she loved it.
Delightful.
She loved it. You saw it.
See, we could never make that here.
Yeah.
It takes a British company to back something like that.
Yeah, we could never.
What have we missed?
How long does it take you to write a first draft?
30 to 40 days, maybe.
Let's say it takes about 30 to 40 days.
Oh,
to
yes.
write
First drafts come out very fast, like television shows. Television writers tended to write fast because they needed the money, one a week, and also you had a schedule, you had a series, you got to get the script out. And we used to take a pill called Dexedrine in those radio days because writers controlled it, the ones I knew, and I did. You take it and you stay up all night and you finish the script and you slept it off. But I remember when I got married to my first marriage, my wife was an actress in a play on Broadway. The curtain rang down at 11 o'clock and we were getting married at 1, and she was exhausted by that time after a full day. So I gave her one Dexedrine and she got through the marriage. But a couple of months later, she had to pop 2 of those to get on stage, and then 3, and then 4, and it finally She overdosed on something, I don't know what, but it can be dangerous.
Dangerous.
No, it's a quick. The television. I started out to say, television writers tend to write fast because of the income, and that carries over to. I guess it carries over into features for me, anyway. I write fast to get a first draft. Once you have a first draft in your hand, it gives you confidence. That's a good note for the students who may be seeing this or listening. A first draft is miraculous because it's like getting a book published, I should think. I've never had a book published, but there it is. It has two things that hold it together, and it's pages after pages, and it's yours, and you did it. It's like finishing some cabinet work, or you've made something. If you dawdle and you get half a script done, it ain't gonna be marvelous. Finish the damn thing, and then make your changes and corrections and improvements.
That's very good advice. What were the most important mistakes you've learned from?
Never let anybody talk you into acting in one of the things you've written. I feel like a fool going out on national television as an actor.